Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Complexity Lounge, a meetup where we gather to talk about all things related to complexity and complex adaptive systems. I'm Jocko Selberg, and somewhere out there pondering her emerging abundance is the always liminal Barbara Frontera, and together we co-host the lounge. Before we kick it off, just a few quick ground rules. We will be recording today's session, so if you do not wish to be recorded, please make sure your camera and microphone are turned off. After JD's talk, we'll have a question and answer period and hopefully a nice conversation with all of you. Should you have a question or comment, you can either raise your Zoom hand or just send your question directly to Barbara via the chat with a big Q in front, and she'll probably just ask you to read it out for yourself. And today, we welcome JD Carlston to the Complexity Lounge. JD is a leader in complex software architecture and engineering. Currently Chief AI Architect at Design Cycle Solutions, JD advances agile methodologies and data discovery, driving eco-friendly innovations in the fashion industry. In today's talk, JD will examine the links between emergence and abundance that play into how we frame problems and intuit solutions that allow us to thrive within complex sociotechnical systems. After that, we will open the floor for discussion. So JD Carlston, welcome to the lounge.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to meet all of you. And I guess I'll just start presenting here. Let's see, get it going. Can you see that okay? Okay. So we are going to talk a bit about how complexity concepts can actually help you deal with stress and uncertainty. So some of those concepts are emergence and abundance and then there are a few others that relate. Let's see if I can actually change slides. Yes. Okay. When solving problems, you want to dig at the roots instead of just hacking at the leaves. That's what we're going to be doing a little bit today. So emergence. Let's talk about how emergence works and how people work and work together. Emergence is properties or behavior which appear only when the parts interact in a wider whole. It's the counterpart of reductionism. It's the process of coming into being or of becoming important or prominent. There's some interesting quotes here where we want to talk like the sum is different than the parts in an emergent system, sometimes greater, sometimes simpler, always different. They move interdependently and they adapt dynamically. Usually it moves toward a specific goal. When you're talking about a system, you're looking to solve a specific objective. So an example of an emergent system is a team. And great teams are not automatic. Teams must learn how to be a team. Teams tend to form around a task, and they're interdependent, and context determines your success as a team. The interactions in an emergent system between people matter often more than the people doing the interacting. That's another like social dynamic that's at play. The thoughts, feelings, and interactions we have internally and within a group are interdependent emergent processes. They're informed by our principles, our values, our beliefs, the agreements that we make. Beliefs are a process in our personal neural network based on a sum of experience. Certainty is an emotion that arises from the belief process. In combination, thoughts, feelings, and actions create an emergent whole of identity. As we think, so we act, so we feel. Our beliefs have an unreasoned tendency toward comfort. Unfortunately, this does not always coincide with reality. Changing how we reason and think is often just as difficult as beginning a new workout routine. It takes practice and it will be uncomfortable. But building your own system of logical ideas and loosely held beliefs that correlate with reality leads to more empowered behaviors, feelings, thoughts, and actions. So let's talk about scarcity. Scarcity can be a reality or it can be a mindset. Within our current systems, it's often difficult to tell which is which. The perception of scarce resources often leads to thinking that creates a death spiral of scarcity itself. And your outlook can affect how you approach the availability of resources. Not having enough of what you need has long been shown to have detrimental consequences for decision making. In order to shift this thinking, science points to expanding the sense of now within consideration. Indigenous cultures call this the seventh generation principle. You may have heard of it. But, how we approach scarcity is something that really does affect how we conceptualize around capitalism, around our understanding of the systems that we're living in. Some of the quotes here are: a scarcity mindset affects neural mechanisms underlying goal-directed decision making. The effects of scarcity are largest when they're compared with previous situations when resources were abundant. So comparative thinking, right? Neuroimaging results show that a scarcity mindset leads to greater engagement on problems that involve scarce resources at the expense of attention to other matters. And lacking the resources to satisfy one's needs has a profound impact on decision making. So let's talk about some examples of scarcity mindset thoughts, just to go a little bit simpler. You might be thinking, when you're in a scarce situation or having a scarcity mindset, there's not enough, or I'm not going to have what I need, or I'm not going to get the result that I want. Those thoughts can lead to feelings, to physiological responses in your body. Those feelings are like things like fear, anxiety, franticness, stress, overwhelm, depression, that sense of uh-oh, constraint, desperation, self-pity, competitiveness, judgment, jealousy, shame, feeling crunched, withdrawing, insecurity, and hopelessness. So all of those feelings can lead you to take actions in the world and behave in certain ways. So that can lead often, and this is where we're talking about decision making, sloppiness, mistakes, dishonesty, manipulation, clinginess, neediness, rushing, desperation, missing out on now, overconsumption, can't find things, being distracted, being wasteful, and conflict. All of these actions are actually indicators of a scarcity mindset. So that mindset leads to mistakes and zero sums and creates win-lose dynamics. So when you're approaching problems with a scarcity mindset, that leads to bigger and bigger mistakes. When you're thinking about being short on time or scarce on time, you make short-term decisions. When you're scarce on money, you have short-sighted spending. When you're scarce on resources, you have inefficiencies. When you're scarce on focus, you split your attention. When you're scarce on creativity, it leads to burnout. And when you're relating to other people with the scarce mindset, you'll probably end up with social anxiety. These are all things that I've seen in action in the work that I've done and have experienced from in a personal sense as well. So the mindset leads to bigger and bigger mistakes. So we're going to try an experiment to induce different mindsets in your body today. If you're prone to panic attacks for this one, just be careful. What I'd like you to do is take 15 fast chest breaths, like that, okay? And notice how you feel. This can actually bring on a panic attack for those who are prone to them. When you breathe quickly, it activates your parasympathetic nervous system into a stress response, which is fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Those are the responses, those are the actions that you might take if you're in a panicked and scarce body, physiological body response. So it really is the feeling of scarcity. But sometimes you might have, like you might interpret it as excitement or just activation. But they're very, very close. So it often is a feeling of there not being enough. It's not the same as there isn't enough. When you focus on what you don't have, it changes the dynamics of the system, of your system. How we breathe affects how we think. Aspiration and the types of inspiration we have are related. How our breath flows affects the actions we choose to take. Yeah, in a sad twist of fate, when you focus on what you lack, you tend to use more of the resources you're low on. So not only does it not use more resources, it creates more work and often more churn. And this has been proven time and time again. A greater focus on utilizing resources efficiently tends to increase the amount of work there is to do. This is from lean principles and lean flow. Oh, an awesome book that I'd highly recommend. This is Lean. Um, so let's define flow. Flow is to move from one place to another in a steady stream, typically in large numbers. It can also be a highly focused mental state conducive to productivity. And it's also what's being transferred into and out of a system without hindrance or blockage. Csikszentmihalyi's flow model predicts that flow happens when the skill level as well as the challenge level you're up against is medium to high. So this is something, there are different emotional states, and flow is one of them. And you can create flow as well as use those other states to indicate if you're where you want to be in for your skill as well as for the level of challenge that you're dealing with in any system. So let's talk a little bit about how our beliefs and influence the abundance in our life. So those beliefs kind of sit in the middle of where we kind of sit within a system. Are, we might think about like the pattern, the high level, if you were to take a DIKW pyramid, the spirit and the soul might be the patterns, the essence of something, and the results and the emotions and the actions are kind of like the bottom, the behaviors of the system. So when you're looking at beliefs and what you believe to be true, that kind of connects that higher level understanding to the actions that you take when you're using flow to change a system. So understanding what you believe to be true changes how and what flows for within a complex system. Hopefully that connects it. I feel like it doesn't quite. So I'll kind of move on here to go into it further. So what is abundance? When we're trying to create abundance, we want plentifulness of the good things of life and prosperity. And in a world of abundance, everything is possible. That's kind of the idea of what you get when you have many things within a system that are supporting the structure of that system. Abundance mindset is the belief that there's plenty of everything for everybody in the world. And it helps you see the limitless potential in life. If you love yourself unconditionally, it's because you've chosen to make happiness and the happiness of myself and others an ultimate goal. And if you assert it, you don't need to justify it or rationalize it as something you're entitled to do. So this is a belief that can impact the essence of a system as well as the actions and the results that a system creates. Thinking in terms of flow leads to abundance when you have an abundant mindset. It's a mindset that's not tied to resource constraints. Focusing on what can flow within a system changes those dynamics and changes what is abundant. So you want to focus on the smooth movement of what you value. To have more cash, right? You want to focus on cash flow. To have more time, you focus on the flow of time. To feel better, you focus on the flow of sensation through your body. When you come to an obstacle, you focus on what flows around it. So you want to be like water. So transformation occurs in flow states. Flow happens within a Goldilocks zone between growth and stagnation on axes of skill and difficulty, and that can lead to abundance over time. We can go into this more if anybody has questions, but I'll just keep going. What flow units you focus on matters for how your system expresses itself. When you optimize for continuous flow and fast feedback loops at a sustainable rate, you'll get a healthier system. And that includes your mental state. There are a few different components when you want to reason about flow. The zone of flow shifts how we feel and approach challenge, as well as how we consciously or unconsciously build our systems and our stated logical reasoning, those beliefs, right? We need a purpose, a problem, input, outputs, a system to organize that helps form the assumptive basis of your logical conclusions, your inferences, implications, change, and the integrated feedback loop that creates that transformation. So all of that, those are all elements of flow. We reason within a point of view, which can be a category or a set of assumptions. So let's go into abundance a little bit more. Abundance mindset thoughts, when you consider the flow of thoughts, you're going to be thinking, we have more than enough. We're getting exactly what we've asked for. We'll find a way. We can become the change we need. So those thoughts and beliefs lead to different feelings, lead to different actions. Some of the feelings that you might have when you have an abundant mindset are gratitude, satiation, appreciation, open-heartedness, curiosity, focused attention, overflowing, empowerment, passion, safety, optimism, and vibrance. All of those are feelings that you can notice that you might be having when you're in an abundant mindset. And the actions you might have when you're considering the flow of actions are compassion, patience, carefulness, consideration, sharing, generosity, creativity, probing, and curiosity, experimentation, interdependence, success, and seeing opportunity. So those are win-win dynamics that result from an abundant mindset. It creates win-win dynamics that result from the abundant mindset, and it leads to innovations. Strategies for abundance lead to flow and lead to creative innovations. So when you stop comparing yourself and your results to others, or even a future or past self, you will actually be more present and create more of those feelings, create more of those thoughts, and create a healthier system overall. When you're having comparative thinking, that provides a model for what you want, but it also creates friction when it's applied within a scarcity mindset. So you can compare what works and what doesn't, but what you're really wanting to focus on are the feelings that you're creating rather than this is worse in the past than it is better in the past. You want to focus on how you're feeling and what you're thinking. There are, let's see. So when you have strategies to create abundance in your life, it helps you think more creatively, and it helps you look at the future instead of focusing on the past to determine what you're capable of. So we were talking a little bit about skill level and difficulty, and you want to be thinking about, like, how can I get better at this skill? How can I make this less difficult in order to pull further into that flow state? When you are being creative, you want to remember that what you want and need is not always dependent on what's happening on a larger scale within the system. It's really truly about those senses, those feelings, and those beliefs. So if something is stressing you out and it's something that you can't control, think about what you can control. And it's really thoughts, feelings, actions. You want to practice making decisions from an abundance mindset. You want to ask yourself, what can we create today? And what is flowing through us? Gratitude, expressing gratitude and being generous are the parents of abundance. So when you express gratitude for the things that you feel abundant about, you are going to actually create more abundance in your life. So here's the other side of the experiment. I want you to take a slow, big belly breath. When you breathe deeply, it relaxes your system. It tells your body that you're in a safe environment. Safe environments are essential for learning and creativity. Modeling abundance also helps others feel safe. Mirror neurons are really powerful. Mirror neurons are brain cells that react both when a particular action is performed and when it is only observed. Feelings are contagious. So, yeah, take another slow, big belly breath and notice how you feel. That's what abundance feels like. That's what inspiration feels like. It flows smoothly, like a slow, relaxed breath. So all these breaths we've been taking also relate to how we think, what we aspire to, and what we are inspired to create by our intuition. So inspiration is being filled with an urge, an intuition, or an ability to do or feel something, especially to do something creative. It can be a sudden, brilliant, creative, or timely idea. And it can also mean to breathe in and inhale. But how you breathe in matters. How you flow within your day matters. So let's just define intuition a little bit. It's a thing that one knows or considers likely from instinctive feeling rather than conscious reasoning. Connecting to your senses and to what feels good and aligned within your being allows you to hone your intuition. It requires a period of Hakuna Matata where you reevaluate what you've been taught, what you've learned, and connect to your senses, connect to your feelings. This alignment period sets you up to be able to move interdependently, adaptively, and dynamically toward the shared and valued goals that you have. It allows you to create a more abundant mindset and respond to other people in a scarcity mindset. People create emergent states and have emergent attributes, of which one is intuition. Socrates said, I decided that it was not wisdom that enabled poets to write their poetry, but a kind of instinct or inspiration, such as you find in seers and prophets who deliver all their sublime messages without knowing in the least what they mean. We can increase insights by exposing ourselves to lots of different ideas that might help us form new connections. So, in your current state, how might you rethink your priorities and assumptions? What inspires you? What do you believe has limitless potential? And what's impeding the flow? What one thing could increase your focus today? And what's one thing you're grateful for? Once you've answered these questions for yourself, you have the opportunity to become an inspiration, to become a power lead for others. So, you want to have a meaningful goal in mind. You want to speak to the heart of it. You want to level set on a regular basis around what's important to you or the systems you work in. And you want to add value-informed reflexes into your interactions and regular life and work planning. That's how you power lead with intention. And that's how you change systems. You power lead to create inspiration. You speak up with positive focus and authentic passion. And you speak first to set the tone. The best way to predict the future is to create it. Power leads connect us to the main source. They help route our thoughts, and our voices will carry further. When you know your purpose, you know what's worth saying is worth saying clearly. You want to be aware of fundamental premises of yourself and others, and you want to speak to them, speak to the heart of them concisely. There's certain change required at every level of our society. Our collective culture has changed, and we have an opportunity to make it stronger. We can create emergent change by connecting to our hearts and allowing our speech to flow from inspiration and abundance. You can share your personal messages of passion for learning and collaboration with everyone that interacts with you. We're all in this together, and abundance is an emergent phenomenon. Imagine how happy you'd be if all your interactions were positive and pleasant. It sounds too good to be true, but it's quite easy to establish. In 2009, researchers at the University of California, Berkeley split 100 participants into groups of 4 and filmed them working together to solve a series of difficult math problems. Afterward, they showed the video to a separate panel and asked members to pick out the leader of the group. In reality, nobody had been assigned the role of leader, yet there was full agreement among the people who viewed the video. The person who spoke first was the leader in their view. Additionally, an astounding 94% of the final answers the group gave to the math problems were those offered by the person who spoke first. Not only did third-party observers think of these people as having high social influence, but their own teammates did too. One person simply held more sway over the group because he or she spoke first. Whether at work or at home, you can use this technique, which positive psychology researcher Michelle Galen calls the power lead, to shift the social script toward positivity. If you're meeting up with a sick friend, take the lead and start with the positive, perhaps by telling her how much better she looks since you last saw her. At meetings, be the first to speak and start with a positive topic before someone can start the social script with complaints or negativity. After you've taken the lead, sit back and watch how others' engagement and motivation improve in response to the power of your positivity. Use proven techniques to see the bright side more than the negative one, and it'll have a powerful effect on your psyche. So yeah, just to remind you, abundance is plentifulness of the good things of life and prosperity. And that's my talk. Oh, wait, I think I've got a few more. Yeah, and don't forget, intuition is emergent as well. the best way to predict the future is to create it. And I've got a bunch of references for the research here that I can share, but just stop.
I think you got to keep that bun dance image up just for us all to ponder.
Okay, I will do that. Get it back. Doo-doo-doo.
No, Jocko.
There you go.
That is
That's my
wild.
that's my life. That's my life.
Oh, shoot.
Well, that was great, JD. It was really interesting in a number of different ways. I mean, when you were talking about scarcity mindset and the sort of perception aspect of it, for me, that's one of the reasons why it's so important to try to have diverse POVs inside any team, organization, whatever you want to talk about. Because that's what can sort of break that scarcity mindset in a lot of ways, right? Is just someone who says, oh, no, if we rearrange this over here, then it's fine. What's the problem? And, or vice versa, help you figure out how to change direction so that the thing that you believe you are lacking is less important.
Yep. Yeah, the who was it? Scott Page talks a lot about the diversity prediction theorem, if I recall, and how important it is to have diversity within a system so that you can kind of get those fresh ideas and create different kind of like flow of change.
So, okay, I could do this all day, but let's open the questions to the floor. Does anyone have any questions for JD? Because I'll just keep going, and we all know how that goes. Nobody likes that. Stefan, yes, please.
I just want to share an observation because I'm doing a workshop right now. Like I'm participating in a workshop and it's over 10 weeks, a financial business management course. And I remembered when you talked about speak first, I remembered that I started very early in the course to ask stupid questions. Like if I didn't understand what the person said, I would just ask because for one, I'm there to learn stuff. And then I lost my fear of being perceived as stupid some time ago. And other people would also start asking like stupid questions, stupid, of course. Now we are in the like next week is the final week, and the people in the course said like something is special about this course. This course is unlike any other course I took so far, and also the teachers told us that our group is special. And I wonder if that is part of it, because one person in the course, I mean, there's probably other aspects to this, like that I took from other participants, right? But this could be one aspect of this this feeling special, right? Well, so yeah, just wanted to share this observation.
I wonder if that speaks to like the purpose being learning in a workshop, right? The flow of questions being really important to enhance that learning experience.
Yeah.
Right. So to frame it around what I was just speaking about, that's kind of how I would look at it. And also you created a power lead around improving the flow of those learning flow units.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think that moment of, listen, I don't understand is super important because that is often what's lacking on a lot of teams, right? Like nobody will step up and say, I don't understand what you're talking about. Or, what does that mean? And that question can often change the direction of a team faster than anything I've ever seen.
Yep.
Dave. Dave has his real
Yeah.
hand up.
Yeah. So real quick, sometimes saying I don't understand breaks the ice, and you find out that significant number of people in the room didn't understand either,
Yeah.
which is helpful. The thing that really hit me, you're talking about scarcity in the whole idea of large corporations are totally designed around a scarcity model.
Mhm. Yeah.
You know, the salary adjustments, resources, time is scarce, you know, our schedules are tight, everything is scarce. And it really hit me how that the control system that is put in place to manage the scarcity is extremely disruptive to flow.
Absolutely.
You know, it's like flow killers. So, I mean, that really kind of like, aha, you know, it's like you want, and then you have all these programs to improve flow. And then it's like, well, we got to monitor everything while you're doing it too. So they're killing it.
Yeah. Yeah, they are. And that is something that I see in the corporate world a lot. And when you reorganize a company for flow and for lean, right, it changes. But if you get the wrong people in as leaders, right, it just easily flips back into that scarcity mindset. It's just so predominant. It's so much more of what we're organized around currently and what the systems we live in are organized around.
Mm-hmm.
But it is possible to change, you know, but it takes changing the goals, it takes changing the people, and it takes changing the relationships between the people.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've seen it work, not very often, but I have seen those kind of changes made. And it is very disruptive to how leaders manage things.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if the leaders are on board, it can work.
Mm-hmm. But even that top down, you know, the top down power structure, right? Like triangular power structure rather than a circular power structure changes that abundance mindset, because there's that power differential where if you're going up the triangle, you know, it's easily overwhelmed. And if you go down, it's easily abstracted away, I guess. Whereas if you're organized in a way that allows for power to be passed through a distributed system, then I guess it helps reduce the friction within that system and the loss of understanding, the loss of whatever is being passed around.
It brings up an interesting question in terms of inclusion and exclusion, and the ability to navigate from one flow to another in terms of different parts of the organization. And is the organization set up to make that easier or difficult? And I'm taking the position that there's not really a right answer to that, because there are things that people will be and probably should be excluded from. And then on the flip side, there are things that people should be, or should be easy for them to be inclusive, but also to move from one to the other. And those power dynamics that Dave, you were saying were based on scarcity. Some of that's there for a legitimate reason. Or I would argue, maybe I'd ask the question, are some of those there for a legitimate reason? And if so, how do you fold that or incorporate into the general culture or system dynamics of the organization?
So I do think they're there for a reason, right? Like there are absolutely benefits to having that power structure. It's a way of like passing decisions to a broader group of people and, you know, creating alignment, right? But there are also other ways of creating alignment where you have crosswalks that intentionally say, hey, this system over here thinks that these things are important, right? And you have this other system over here that thinks these things are important. And how are we going to do some kind of like crosswalk between those two systems? How are we going to translate and transform our understanding of like domain language or an interface within a system or any kind of like values, right, that we're capturing? I hope that so it's important to be intentional when you're translating between systems that have differences like that, I guess.
Yeah, I was opening it up for the conversation for the group. I mean,
Oh,
as
yeah.
as the group are there inclusion, exclusion, or just non-inclusion, I guess I could say, are various constraints within the organization. And of course, the constraints are context specific. So again, there are times when they make sense, times where they don't. The problems become is when you try to set universal constraints. And that could be a constraint of abundance, I asked the group. Whereas there's parts of the organization you probably want to optimize for abundance. Question is are there parts of the organizations where you might not want to do that?
So if you're, for example, if we're thinking about it in terms of lean and you want to resource optimize, right? You know, but as far as I've seen, when you optimize for flow, you'll end up with more resource optimized over time anyway.
Typically in mechanistic or manufacturing systems, you are generally optimizing for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But in knowledge work, because there's so much more variation, it's the interplay between those two.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a huge gradient between the efficiency and the effectiveness, let's say, right? It's not, in other words, it's not a binary. It's how you fold them into each other.
Mm-hmm. And that's where the crosswalk of the values that you're caring about matters, I think.
They're also somewhat context specific, I might argue.
Mm-hmm. But there still has to be some kind of translation.
There's got to be enough of a shared value that you can actually interact with each other without wanting to poke each other in the eye.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts from the group on that as well, or am I going off into La La Land?
Well,
let me restate the question.
No, I think it's an interesting question, right? But I mean, what I would say is that part of the problem is when you codify inclusion and non-inclusion in a
Yeah.
decision-making system is when you run into problems because you are deliberately cutting out that diverse point of view that we talked about before and limiting yourself to whatever the included group quote unquote knows.
Often unintentionally as well, but yeah, the end result is that you are. Yeah.
Yeah, because you're codifying, you're limiting the variation, right?
Yeah, and that eventually leads, that's the death spiral.
Yeah.
As the group that's making the decision gets smaller and smaller, and their ability to vary their point of view or to look at things from different angles then becomes more limited. You end up having, essentially like decision stagnation.
Mm-hmm.
Or conversely, what we were joking about on the pre-call or whatever is, baby name by committee. So it's again, it's how they fold into each other
Yeah,
to match the context of the problem that you're trying to solve.
right.
And that's
And
not
that's,
easy because
yeah,
again, we bring in temporality into it all the time is what you optimize for now and change system conditions change. You are almost immediately, the moment that you optimize, you're almost immediately not optimized because you're moving through time.
right. And that's my point about codification. It's not that
Yep.
I don't think that these things are important. It's that once you decide, okay, these 4 people are making all of the decisions, you have like taken it down to a level where, and it may have started off as there was a good reason for that. But as you try to scale or grow a scale, I love the word scale so much, grow the organization or even change the organization, that decision stagnation that I was talking about, because you have just these 4 points of view, making all the decisions, it limits your ability to change.
Right, which is why we're in that complexity zone between that more randomness and that more orderedness. If you go too ordered, you're in trouble. You don't want to slip into chaos. What you're doing is you're constantly navigating that space.
I mean, we're a small enough group that you guys can just unmute yourselves and weigh in whenever you feel like it, because, don't be shy.
Yep, jump on in.
Because
Keep us honest.
Jocko and I will do this all day long.
We
I mean,
often
JD,
do.
it's an interesting, because it's a melding of a lot of different things, your presentation, right? I saw some breath work that, we do in yoga stuff and other things. And I think that franticness and freneticism that you mentioned early on has unfortunately become kind of a guiding principle.
Yeah.
It's a good thing, supposedly.
Yeah.
Dave is laughing.
Well, yeah. It just kind of goes into the 15 quick breaths, and our systems are designed so you're always taking quick breaths.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's that's what's sort of built into a lot of these things, is that because you approach everything with this scarcity mindset, you're constantly in that state of flight or flight.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody, and I mean, it's hard enough when you yourself are in that state of fight or flight. When you have like 15, 20 people at the same time, it's mind blowing.
Yeah.
And when you slow down and you take long breaths, then people get upset because you're stealing our air. It's
well, it's somewhat of a paradox too, because the scarcity leads to too much stuff. Because everybody's responding to the scarcity, so they're trying to hoard up and throw everything in the system as much as possible. So it's actually incredibly counterproductive.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I was thinking maybe I want to ask about this, because the chart had flow with the growth and the it's almost managing the tension between scarcity and abundance.
Mm-hmm.
And in some cases, there's a reality. I mean, even in a manufacturing environment, when you start focusing on flow, you will discover where you're scarce.
Yeah.
And then you have to figure out, well, what are we going to do about it?
Right.
But often with scarcity, we limit ourselves because we have a lot more abundance than we think we have.
Mm-hmm.
The abundance also feeds into the scarcity, so they go round and around.
Yeah, and I like that whole thing of sort of managing the tension between two real things and how they pull against each other. And flow is this is my interpretation, finding that sweet spot in between.
Mm-hmm.
And then moving around that state space. Yeah.
And limiting your whip, right? So that you're limiting the resources that you're using at any given time.
Yeah, the scarcity of the amount of stuff that you have in flight creates abundance and focus so that you can actually move things, which then feeds back in the cycle and you establish flow. Now, the problem is maintaining it. And that's where we get into the system dynamics. Can you create a system that can make that sustainable?
And then trusting the system.
As well as it being able to respond to perturbations, because you will get waves moving through the system. How does the system respond to that?
Right. And figuring out how you want your system to evolve requires you to maintain your own state of flow.
How do you want a system to evolve? Can you go deeper into that?
Yeah. So let's say you were talking about how these different pieces might need to interface with each other, and you're talking about the diversity issue where, like, if you don't have a diverse enough team or a diverse enough set of nodes, you might end up limiting your ability to produce good decisions or good products or whatever it is. And you might need to evolve, right, in order to change that.
So by evolve, you mean just the ability for the system to change over time?
The ability of the system to change over time, the transformability of a system.
I just remind people there's no future state in evolution, whereas in design there typically is one. That's the reason I'm asking.
Yeah, but it is kind of an evolutionary process that you're going through. But
after the fact,
yeah.
And I've been in rooms where the makeup of the people in the room is very diverse. But guess what? They're all engineers. And they all think the same way.
They're neurodiverse.
So it depends on the facets of diversity, right?
Yeah, exactly. You need to think, not just some of the traditional things around diversity, but around thinking, backgrounds, the whole mix.
Education. Yeah, all of that.
Kyle has unmuted himself. I think he might have something to say. Take it away, Kyle.
I'm letting this marinate because I've often thought about scarcity and strain as being generative, and constraints being enabling. We talk about that a lot, and so I'm reluctant to call myself a musician, but when I go out and I get a whole bunch of new gear, I find myself really overwhelmed with all the knobs that I have to twiddle, and so I get paralyzed. I have to usually reset myself and say, okay, I'm going to use this one piece of gear and make some cheesy 80s stuff. So when I really tighten up that constraint and focus on that, I create a false scarcity. Then it becomes the enabler to push through. And so I'm trying to think of abundance in this case as being that enabler in that context.
Yeah, what are you creating abundance in, I guess?
Irina has unmuted herself. Irina, do you want to jump in? Or was that a mistake? There she is.
It was a mistake, but so thank you, JD. I think so much to think about with this talk and the conversation that's followed. I think the idea of flow to me resonates quite deeply. And as those who have been in rooms with me know, my scarcity sometimes comes in perspectives beyond my lived professional experience, which has been almost exclusively in healthcare. And so when we talk about different systems, I try to understand, but I don't have the lived experience, the abundance of experience necessarily. So I apologize if that scarcity of experience negatively influences anything. But I think of my experiences at the bedside with patients, and it sounds very similar to what I hear talked about in corporate America, but that perspective is so important in terms of, do we have the resources to care for the patient? And when we have an abundance perspective and we feel that the resources can flow to the patient, things do go so much smoother than when we're worried. So I think what I'm trying to say is, for me, a lot of this comes down to granularity. When I can think of the flow of what is needed for the context of a specific situation, it can come naturally. And when we have to manage like 3 ventilators available for an entire intensive care unit, and you think about the resources differently. And so it brings us to a different level of abstraction. And that sense of scarcity can be quite detrimental. And so it's, how do we find that balance between a perception or a real constraint or scarcity and achieving that flow situationally where we allow the resources to flow? Or JD, I loved your statement about when we encounter obstacles in abundance, seeing what flows around them and not necessarily seeing them as an obstruction, but as a modulator to how or what we do. And yes, I don't think that made any sense, but thank you for allowing me to talk.
I think it actually, well, it jived for me. I think they talk about medical systems in This Is Lean, and they talk about when you're optimizing in the example they use, it's like breast care imaging, right? Like and how when you optimize for those imaging systems or for the labs that are required, you end up taking a lot more time for the actual person and create worse outcomes for the person that's having the imaging and the procedure in the labs run. So you can actually use fewer resources, for, in your example, you would use fewer resources if you get that person moved through the system more quickly. And I think that's part of what I'm hearing.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's when we focus on that one piece of the system that needs to flow and how we enable the cohesion there.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
Yeah.
we're very driven by the bigger electronic systems.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I keep coming back to the idea of the problem of abundance as well, and the secondary and tertiary knockoff effects of abundance. Social media, for example, right? Unintended consequences in the medical field. It may be having 8 different specialists for a single patient that actually ends up impeding flow because people are walking on each other. So I'm very interested in looking at the unintended positive and negative impacts of things on either side of the binary, rather than saying that one's good, that one's bad. It's like, well, no, not necessarily.
The healthcare system in the United States, and I'm talking about the United States now, so if you're from somewhere else, we're special. It is, in that case, you have this scarcity abundance mindset imposed by an outside, payment system, i.e. in the insurance. And so, for example, in many hospitals, those 8 specialists that are tripping over each other, that's because that's what the insurance companies will pay for. But the extra ventilators that they need are not necessarily in the budget, because we need to optimize the use of the equipment so that the insurance company will give us the money. So there's like a really, when Dave talked about the tension between scarcity and abundance, it's really interesting because, look, we're pretty rich right now. I mean, as a society, let's say the West, we got a lot of stuff. And yet we limit the access to that stuff in many of the most draconian ways. Because we have this mindset of, well, we need to preserve it for us. And that mindset is really, and I'm not going to say capitalism, but
It's it. It's the C word, Barbara. It's the C word.
Oh God. Alarm fatigue. What is oh yeah, Kyle is talking about when nurses start ignoring the signals, right, Kyle? The alarm fatigue. The
alarms going off just become the constant din, and so
The
there
norm.
becomes this sort of apathy to the things that are supposed to be attention grabbing.
Yeah, it's abundance of signal, right?
Right.
Same thing in a cockpit of an airplane. There's a problem, and then all sorts of alarms start going off.
And I think that's actually what's going on in a lot of these organizations, right? The flavor of the day, pull that in, flavor of another one. Then you got the system trying to do all of them at the same time, and then that's not working. So they bring in a different consultant, or they do a new internal initiative in order to solve a problem that is essentially of their own making.
So what I'm kind of hearing in that is abundance creating scarcity, because the abundance of all these signals is creating a scarcity of focus.
Yeah. So
And vice versa. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, there's, abundance is a very large quantity of something, but true abundance, like if we're speaking to what we want to be abundant, you have to add that value qualifier. What are we valuing? Right. And that's what part of the point that I'm trying to make is we want to make sure that what we make abundant is what we value.
Whose value, though?
Well, that's within your organization. That's who gets to determine what's valued, and that's
All
really
for the
question.
stakeholders. Yeah, the
Right, and that's
stakeholders,
the
perhaps,
question.
in the C word. Yeah, yeah.
Right. Yeah. The C
Yeah,
word.
but it does to be aware of that and to see if you're actually aligned as a person who has internal values and internal beliefs, right? And if you're working for a company where those values aren't aligned, you don't want to work for that company anymore.
Well, but it goes back to the variation within the companies, though, because the idea is that they do want that variation, different values, as long as they align to a higher level value, whatever that is. So it gets tricky in the liminal space in between that. And a lot of companies will drive out that variation on different values, where actually it could probably be very useful, but then you have the problem of abundance again.
Well, I'm sorry, JD, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say that, what you value is your flow unit, right? Whatever those flow units are. So if you're valuing the ventilator systems, you're going to be looking at it from the ventilator systems point of view. But if you're valuing people, right, you're going to be looking at it from the people's point of view. And if you're working for a health company that, is valuing people, you might feel a lot better. You might have a lot less anxiety. You might have a lot fewer of those terrible thoughts that lead to your own scarcity mindset, So
But is the head of finance having those same feelings that you're describing?
Well, and that's what I was going to come up with was like when I think of what I was thinking of throughout your talk and some of these other things is the role that the budget has played in my career. I am, you have to make the case for the budget for your team or your department. And then you either if you have to manage the budget so that you have enough, but you also have to be able to spend everything. Otherwise, they'll give you less. And so it creates this bizarre mindset where you're like, you're looking at the budget and you're like, in the beginning of the year, you're like, well, we won't have enough. We won't have enough. We won't have enough. And then by the end, you're like, crap, we have to spend this money right away. In order to make sure that they don't cut the budget for next year. And, sorry, go ahead.
Interestingly, that actually happens in flow as well, right?
Yeah.
So you get starvation in your queues or whatever temporarily, you get an overreaction to it, but it's lagged overreaction, which then leads to a flood, which then does blah, 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 blah. So you have that same thing happening in your flow on multiple levels, by the way. And the higher the level is, usually the more destructive it is because the system can't respond as quickly.
I just wanted to jump back in really quick because I think, and I specifically focused on the ventilator system, which is very different than, say, the electronic charting system. And I think the statements you made about us focusing on like the electronic medical record and the charting system, which is really an accounting software that's been repurposed to also collect some patient data that matters to clinicians.
Yeah.
When I was thinking of mechanical ventilators, I was thinking of managing an intensive care unit. And if I have a trauma patient comes in that needs a ventilator and I don't have it, that patient dies. Or I have to, right? And so it's not that I'm managing the ventilator systems. I'm still looking at managing patient resources, but I'm trying to manage it for the entire unit rather than for a specific patient. And when you get to the bedside, you're juggling the perspective of what resources do I need and have available to care for this patient in this moment right now,
Right. Yep.
while also managing how do I care for all 30 patients in this unit.
But as your
Morning, Tim.
supervisor, I'm worried about balancing how many ventilators we use on and need on average, because we saw this in the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
Most hospitals had the number of ventilators that they used on average, and suddenly they were inundated. And nobody has just ventilators hanging around. These are expensive things that have to be built. So suddenly you had this mad rush of like, we need more ventilators for this extraordinary event in terms of recent history.
So COVID was interesting for that because it's the ventilators and it's the physical equipment, but it's also the people to operate them.
Yeah.
Because they're very dangerous pieces of equipment when not used correctly. And so, yeah, you get this interplay, and I'm not like, there's a pandemic and then there's also things break down. And so you have a fleet of 20, but 5 are out of service. And what do you do and how do you manage? And yeah, it's not an exact and a specific example, but it's just, it's that how do we balance the different perspectives so that we don't fall into the traps of scarcity when we could be managing from the abundance perspective. And I think the reason to me that example came to mind is because if I hoard ventilators for the what if, I'm limiting the care I can provide to patients who need it now.
Yep.
And so it's how that scarcity mindset can create unhelpful fear-based responses or plans. And I think your budget example very much ties into this. It's that fear of we won't have enough by the end of the year that leads to a lot of the problems. And again, working in the public sector, I very much know that if you don't spend your budget, that's how we get ventilators because we haven't spent everything. And then you need to make a big purchase to spend the rest. And so you end up with what you need. But yeah, the managers who know have their lists and their cutoffs. But
right. And that applies to the ER as well, right? Is how many people do you have available to respond? And you're always trying to optimize against a number that is unknowable in advance, except for by probability, perhaps. So how do that medic availability in the ER is related to all our other parts of the organization as well. And you're trying to balance those at all time.
And the overall system. Because it's harder to see your primary care physician, so people go to the ER.
Yeah, exactly.
So
failure demand is a big part of it.
Scarcity in one area can cause overflows in other areas.
In sometimes predictable ways, but oftentimes in unpredictable ways.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't go into Slack a ton in this. I didn't talk about Slack at all, but Slack has a big impact on flow and how you design for things and what Slack you define within the system as being important. And there's like principles that you can use. where it's like your margin of error and your standard error bands, or your, you try to design a system so that you have that margin to be able to handle at a certain constraint or under certain constraints. But yeah, when you have a catastrophic event like COVID or whatever it is, your constraints kind of go out the window. But planning for resilience is a whole thing.
It sounds kind of like that's what Dave was talking about with the cockpit. That's what's happening with at regular intervals, is that there is this abundance of stimuli, and there's somebody making a decision, prioritization of all that stimuli regularly. Same with the nurses and all of the alarms going off. It's not that none of them need attention. It's that through experience, we've figured out which ones have that sort of that bandwidth, that the give and the forgiveness to allow it to go. As I was just sitting here, my sous vide alarm just went off, and it's the sous vide. It's not going to go anywhere. Nothing's going to happen. I'm going to leave it alone. Like, I already know the alarm is not actually going to do anything for me, really, at the end of the day. But
that is the bougiest thing you have ever said to me. My sous vide alarm went off.
I don't know how to cook, but it makes me look good. I can pretend with a sous vide. Anyway, but where was I going with that before I had to defend myself and my sous vide?
Barbara's a sneaky one. She'll derail you. Don't let her.
No, it seems like and I'm a recovering Six Sigma guy, and so there was a lot of like hard thresholds that we built into things that said, kind of to your point before, Jocko, there was all this attention grabbing. Everything's off kilter. Everything's broken. We got to fix it right now. Most of it was just that our thresholds were so unnecessarily tight because we had this assumption of permanence that really, at the end of the day, we just naturalized firefighting nonstop. And really what it was just like, I get somebody to manage this and it'll be fine as long as it lives within this space. It's not actually a fire. It's not an emergency. And then it was just like normal prioritization, like anything else. It was just unnecessary stress because of those parameters that were established.
That's what I meant. You need a system that can absorb that variation and respond to it. Most systems can't because they're not designed that way.
Right. But we build all of all that stimuli in a silo, not in that relationship. And then we manage the relationship with that, which is interesting. I think we were just saying, JD, about the difference between building those things from the point of view of the ventilator versus the caretaker.
I don't think it's necessarily a problem that they're designed in isolation, but I think once they're released into the system, you need to look at it from a systems point of view rather than that isolated point of view. What's it doing for me? Well, that's great, but what harm is it doing over there potentially? And you actively have to look for that stuff.
It depends. If I've got a bunch of like Siemens and NEC pieces of equipment in a patient's room, yes, I wouldn't expect them to necessarily negotiate the space. The hospital should take care of that. If I'm in a Boeing cockpit, Dave, then I kind of want that to be form fit for the pilot that's going to be in there.
Yeah, it's designed for all pilots that are flying that class of plane.
Or that design cockpit, Dave.
Yeah. The problem wasn't so much that the overwhelming tools were there. It's when they introduced a new usage for a particular indicator that they were not trained on as to how to respond, because the pilots are used to responding that. It's when they all go off at once, they have to shift into a different way of looking at the problem. But when you get a signal that you have no idea what it is because nobody told you what it's signaling, you have nothing to work with in order to respond. And again, we could generalize that out to organizations.
So when I designed my smart home, I built in soft constraints and hard constraints. Here we go, Barbara.
Look at Barbara's reaction.
Your what?
My smart home. So
Is this like Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous? Like
Oh,
meetup now?
you
What's
leave him
that?
alone, Barbara. You leave
it's not
him
even a
alone.
smart home. It's
What's
just a nerd version.
happening here?
It's the opposite, a dumb zone, a dumb home. I live in a
Yeah.
dumb
It
home.
is.
No,
So
when I
JD,
built this though, I built it so that if like a water sensor goes off in one room, I can turn off the water of the house because that means water is leaking somewhere. When I put a timer on when we go into the shower, the light changes color. I don't want to turn off water to the shower at a particular time. Like those are hard constraints that don't necessarily make sense, but having light changes still send a signal. So like having different levels of interaction makes sense in a lot of these cases.
so I'm just curious, JD. You know, the whole metaphor, the 15 quick breaths, and if you run into people, and at least I've seen this in my experience of, I actually like the feeling of being in this constant state of anxiety and drive, and that's sort of my reason for existence, of being able to do stuff while constantly, you know, on the edge of panic.
Mhm.
And you know, and sort of dealing with that in the organizations. It's kind of your feelings about that.
I definitely do have feelings about that. I think I have seen it.
Everybody take one big belly
Yeah.
breath and we'll
So many feelings.
Yep. And I do think it contributes to poor decision making because it is an
Yeah.
example of resource constrained flow.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've had people tell me that if things were calmer, I wouldn't want to work here,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is interesting.
Good. You should go
Let's
now.
make it calmer so that you'll find somewhere
Well,
else.
the idea is that we're not responding to change fast enough because everybody's at a low resource efficiency rate because they're sitting around belly breathing rather than getting work done, would be the argument.
Right.
Yep. Yeah. And but at the same time, it actually, again, it leads to poor decision making. It's, you know, like not having enough oxygen in your brain has an actual effect.
Well, and it's super reactive, right? You're constantly in the moment, and so because you know you're shaking up things up, you're changing. But you know, one of the things that bothers me the most about dealing with people with that approach is the lack of consistency that it can create within an organization. And I don't mean consistency where we're all in lockstep. I mean consistency in the values and visions that you started your conversation with, JD. Because, you know, you're hired by an organization that tells you they have one set of values, and then you introduce someone who's got this like, you know, frenetic mindset, and suddenly the values of the organization change, whether they want them to or not.
Yep, because again, it's that they're leading, it's a power lead in setting the tone. We had, at one of the companies I worked for, we had a robot head exercise where we would sit around on a table and we'd have to build a robot head. It was a manufacturing like example. And you'd have to cut out the head and you'd have to cut out the eyes and cut out the mouth. And they'd have people do that, you know, and each person would have their own little piece that they were responsible for. And when you do it the first time, everybody's doing it as fast as they can. They're going, and it turns out that you create so many robot heads. If you do it again, when you limit the whip and you create these robot heads again, it slows everybody down, but you end up creating more robot heads, right? And it has a completely different feeling where it's more calm and it's like you've got a whip of two and you're just creating this, and then you pass the head along and you glue it on and it's all good. And so the process itself and the limiting of the whip and the constraints on the things that you value can have a great effect on how people feel within that system too.
Well, I think there's potentially a large assumption in here that we have to be careful with is the assumption that upper management may have that you are actually expendable.
Yeah.
And I have had upper management directly tell you that we are a company that pays for performance. That is what you're evaluated on. And the immediate response to that is 15 quick breaths. Right. And they want you to remain in that state because if you're not producing, you are gone. But they don't seem to realize that a big part of your job now, or our jobs now, is to actually step away and think and to look at the larger system so that we can see what's going on. And if we're just simply responding all the time or performing all the time, that's actually harmful to the company. But that is a very deeply ingrained thought. And it's at the heart of, the C word, as we're talking about, is you essentially are expendable if you're not producing.
Yeah.
It reminds
You're not
me of what
performing.
Performing or producing.
JD, you had on one of the slides, you had a quote from the Lean book.
Mm-hmm.
If you focus on efficiency, you actually reduce efficiency.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the same thing, right? If you focus on performance of people, you might introduce other factors like fear, and they actually the performance goes down.
Right. Yep.
And I was thinking of Amy Edmondson and her psychological safety. So this would be the other, like nudging the system in another direction, like increasing safety, the feeling of safety. Now you have the chance to take a deep breath and you actually start performing better. And for the work in progress limit, I think these exercises, these games are so great because if you haven't experienced it, you wouldn't believe it, because common sense would tell you, no, give it all you have and rush and as fast as you can and so on and so on. But
it's like the paradoxes in the Russian dolls, each Russian doll has a different paradox in it, right?
I mean, yeah, many years ago, I worked with someone who was literally the most efficient person I've ever seen. Her ability to get a lot of work done in a very short period of time. So, we'd give her a bunch of work and then can you do this? Yeah. And then she would sit at her desk and read a book because she had done the work of like 5 people. And we were like, this is so awesome. And then one day, one of the C-suites walked through and they were like yelling at us, like, why is she allowed to read a book at her desk? And we were like, just leave her alone. Just don't even make eye contact. Just walk away. But he could not, because the performative aspect of work is what they valued. It was to be seen, to be working. That was the most important thing. And, we would like show him the numbers and say, look, she's doing the work of like 5 people. Please just let us like deal with this ourselves. But no. So we asked her if she could not read a book at her desk. And eventually she left because, what she was concerned about is what you should be concerned about, which is that as a resource, if she could do the work of 5 people and we gave her enough for, let's say, like what we thought of as an 8-hour day and what was actually a 4-hour day for her, she did not want to be in a position where we created 8 hours worth of work for her. Mm-hmm. And so like we had all sorts of ideas. We were like, go take a walk. We'll tell them you're at lunch, but eventually the system, she realized that she could not operate inside that system because, she had created, and it was an unrealistic set of expectations for anyone else. And when she left, we had a big problem because we had to go in and say, we need to hire like 4 people now. And they were like, no, you can't, you did, and we were like, no, we need like 4 people now. And, it became this sort of dance of how do we hide this asset? And literally we were like, I don't like to call people assets, but it was like, can we put her desk somewhere where they won't see her? Like, because we knew the value of what we had, but they did not because of a particular metric they were using.
Right. And not only that, you spent how much time talking and thinking about something that was not only a non-issue, but the end result of that was something that sub-optimized the system.
Oh, Dave, you
Well,
raised your hand.
Yeah, well, I was thinking possibly being someone who tends to work in bursts, that sometimes those moments of slack actually create the capacity to work fast.
Critical. I'd say they're absolutely
And
critical.
the other thing that Barbara's point around the performative, because I think what happens too is when they say, yeah, we're going to judge by performance, that we often don't define well what the performance is. We often, or we define it in a way that's really destructive.
Yes.
But it often becomes what's really judged when we look at, when the pay raises are handed out and whatever. You're not really judging performance. You're judging how many quick breaths I can take.
How well you can manipulate the system, right?
And-
How
and-
well
and
I can
right,
tell you what
right.
you want to hear, right?
And so you're rewarding the illusion of performance. And that's that whole performative nature. It's that, well, he comes in on weekends and, and she's always leaving late. And those are the ones you reward, while the boss we all want to work for, who delegates and sits in their office and leaves people alone and is a lot calmer, doesn't get rewarded.
They may be
So-
coming in on
so-
weekends because they're inept, right? They couldn't get their work done because they
Right,
don't know
yeah,
what they're
because
doing.
I'd rather spend my time with my family.
It's
so
outcome versus output, right?
yeah,
Well, it's
So-
both. You need both, but yeah.
Sure,
if you
sure.
overemphasize it.
And I think that's an advantage of home office, because if you sit at home and do the task of 5 people, then you can sit around and read a book, because your boss won't pass your desk and say, "Oh, what is she
Well,
doing?"
reading a book is part of the job, though, too.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that you're reading something that's associated that you can feed back into the job, right?
Well, maybe not, but maybe she was just reading Charles Dickens. But the point is too that managing
Same.
these things in a certain way, like, a big part of my job is often writing, and so you may see me and I look like I'm staring off into space because I have to write 800 words, extolling the glory of your product. And I may look like I'm not doing anything, but I am in fact figuring out how to create something that will optimize an outcome for you. But if you walk past my desk and I'm like I'm like this, or I'm holding my head, or I'm drinking a cup of tea, I am judged to be not efficient inside their system.
yeah.
So when I
Or
was
how
at-
can you write it so fast? It's because I've already written it in my head.
when I was at Capital One, top down from our chief design officer, we were a creative team, and so we needed time to be to just explore stuff. And so we kind of had this funny reputation of the people that would stare out windows and watch Toy Story on our laptops and whatever, like just go wandering through the woods. And people would come and ask what we're doing, and we'd say thinking. And that was it. They knew that we didn't solve problems by staring at them longer. We needed to kind of go do something else and get away from them for a bit. But that freedom to do that, I thought was really, really important. And since then, I've been advocating for that wherever I go.
Well, it's a moment of reflection. Even if, Barbara, the person is reading some unrelated book, it's still allowing their subconscious to catch up to everything that's going on. It's processing information.
Yeah.
Right. And here's what kind of worries me about AI. I think we were talking about this before the call, JD, is that when these tasks that normally take 4 or 5 days or a week get compressed into 4 or 5 minutes, and you have task after task moving through the system in terms of flow, there won't be any time, or at least we'll have to make a radical adjustment for that reflection and be able to catch up with all the changes that are going on so that we can make, quote unquote, wise decisions that computers cannot make. And so this headlong rush into efficiency or speed actually may cause the problems that we were talking about in the first half of these discussions, which is abundance, overabundance, but not enough time to actually block what it all means, which will lead to poor decision makings, which could potentially lead to collapse.
I agree, because as your values change, or as the values change around you, right? Or as the meaning that you're associating to whatever thing that you're doing changes because the system or the market has changed.
And your values along with them as they're adapted to your environment. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I see the collision of values, like Stefan, your remark on the, working from home and getting more done. And yet at the same time, that drives the scarcity police crazy.
Scarcity police.
Because we can't watch you.
New complexity term, scarcity police.
Scarcity police, yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting time we live in, because I think that you really hit on something here, JD, with this scarcity and abundance tension. And because we all have more than we ever had here in the West.
By far. It's exploded.
By far. It's ridiculous. I mean, it's ridiculous how much we have. And yet we focus almost exclusively on what we don't have.
That's right. That actually seems paradoxical, but it's not when you follow through it, right?
Yeah, it's like but as you say, in the process of focusing on that scarcity, we also create an enormous amount of waste that lives in the middle between scarcity and abundance. And as it grows and grows, it's like that plastic island in the Pacific Ocean, that just keeps growing and growing and growing and pushing those two poles further and further apart.
Yep. And that happens socially, like in the countries as well, like to a certain extent. There's a certain amount of abundance that has grown for everyone on the planet, but at the same time there's a vast difference between the haves and have-nots as well,
which is increasing
yeah,
dramatically,
yeah.
over time. I mean, that disparity has grown so much over the last 20 years. It's almost unmeasurable at this point.
Yeah.
We've increased the amount of food waste, but we've also increased the amount of hungry people, the number of hungry people.
Yep.
And yet there's no one who seems to be able to figure out a way to reconcile those two things effectively.
It's an ongoing challenge because there is no way to permanently rectify it. The whole idea is that you're constantly moving around this space, balancing them as best you can.
Right, but it goes back to that sort of ambient system that we were talking about on a different thing a little while ago, right? Because the ambient system that we're all operating under is this idea of profit.
Mm-hmm.
We only invest in things that are profitable. We only, we have to figure out a way to leverage things or monetize things. And as a result, that's what's one of the things that's increasing this waste.
That's the values. That's right.
Yeah, that's the values. Yeah.
Well, I would say profitable within the constraint of my yearly or 2-year performance window.
Yeah.
That's which I think is an imposed scarcity. You have more time than you think you have. Go ahead.
It's both. But
so I briefly mentioned the 7th generation principle, but what indigenous communities did was look at any choice that they made and think, how will this impact 7 generations down the line? How would they have thought about this 7 generations ago? And looked at including that metric in their systems so that they're taking a longer term view and making sure that they're not like harming the structures that they value, right? And
That's a
yet
big,
right now, most of our organizations are looking at it from a quarterly, 3-month, maybe 2 years, maybe, you know.
that's a big problem in the AI world with superintelligence, whereas the generations here could simply be the generations of the frontier
Processor
model.
generations, whatever.
Yeah, whatever. But
Yeah,
here we
well,
have
yeah.
we have an existential risk here, right? Supposedly, that's what many
Yeah.
say, anyways. But the thing is, we don't know whether it's existential or not. That actually makes it
Oh.
worse. It's abundance again, right?
Yeah. Definitely seeing indicators that there's existential issues here in Utah, for example.
So, what else?
Yeah, right.
Well, but that's the question, right? Like if you look at the question of existential risk purely through the lens of short-term profitability, as opposed to the 7th generation principles, that will not, it actually speeds up the existential risk, because you are saying, well, okay, I have to make the quarterly number. Let's double down on this thing. And
it's a super efficient entropy, right?
Yeah. Right over the cliff. There we go.
Yeah.
Right over the cliff. Well, JD, you've given us so much to think about. It's actually frightening. I hope you're happy that you scared me.
Oh dear. Take a slow, big belly breath.
I'm the worst. Does anyone have any, we're coming up at, we're at 1:46. I don't want to keep JD, on the hook for this any longer. Does anybody have anything else to add? Has anybody had any other thoughts? Bernie, Darren, Irina, Stefan? No, Stefan's like, oh, I'm staying away from this.
Thank you
Irina,
so much.
I just want to say, having your perspective on this has been fascinating. I mean, it's really great.
Oh, thank you. I come from a very frontline provider aspect of healthcare, not, I've never aspired to pursue management in healthcare for numerous reasons, but
thank you.
Yeah.
And we esteem you highly for making that choice.
Yes, really.
Well, I got to send you an OODA loop presentation. That's the best I've ever seen. That is from somebody that's an ER person, and it just nails OODA right on the head.
Yeah.
It's very hard to find, by the way. But
absolutely. But please do send it. And my Emerge colleagues are absolutely my best projects, especially around teamwork, have been with emergency room physicians and nurses, and they're a fantastic group of humans. I'm a respiratory therapist, so we're all over the hospital, but Emerge is a special place.
Yeah, but again, something that is being shaped and changed by forces beyond their control in many ways.
100%, yeah.
And that may actually end up being here in America. I'm not speaking for the Europeans, but that may become the biggest existential risk we face, is access to healthcare.
Yeah. Well, in Canada and Emerge, our biggest problem is output, because they can't care for patients because there's nowhere to send patients once they've been
that was what I was
stabilized and finished.
implying, what I was talking to you earlier. Yeah, that's a big thing.
Yeah. I mean, you face all sorts of problems now that in the past we would have. I mean, I always think of the story of the older woman who had no family, who broke both her arms.
Yeah.
And the hospital wanted to keep her because there was nowhere else to send her, and she was incapable of caring for herself. But the insurance company said, she's out.
3 days. Yep.
Yeah, we're lucky not to have that in Canada, but it's tough.
Well, we expect a call from me and Barbara. Maybe this sounds like something that might be a future talk.
Yeah, you might actually
That
have
would be
to.
cool.
You actually might have to be our July speaker, Irina. JD, we're not trying to step on your toes here, but this is, I mean, it actually, the two of you have given us a really fascinating perspective on how to think about these problems, you know, from your different points of view. It is, it really brought it full circle for me anyway, having you here to give us a practical example of the themes that JD was talking about.
Yeah.
So
It didn't involve the software development. I love all you software development people, but oh my God. There's only so much I can take about the problems of software development.
we don't even have any software developers on the call. What are you talking?
I don't think so. I think we're
The
software
first.
development free. It really is a first. JD, we would really like to thank you so much for this. I hope, do you have any final thoughts that you want to share, or would you like to tell people where they can find your work?
Sure. I think mostly I'm on LinkedIn anymore. As far as final thoughts, I think it serves all of us to really try to slow down and think through things. If we're knowledge workers, if we're healthcare professionals, right? All of us could do to use a more calm and thoughtful approach to the problems that we're facing. And I think when people do that, will actually, like, if more people do that, it will actually help create better solutions for everything that we're working on.
Yeah, I feel like the other day I was sort of thinking about this because I was looking at the Department of Labor stuff, and I was thinking, you know, we're in this period of enormous productivity, but I don't feel like we're making any progress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep.
I mean, here in the States, we are as quote unquote productive as we have ever been. But I feel like our progress is stalled in many ways.
Yeah. The progress on the things that actually make life worth living, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, JD, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you to all of you that have hung in with us. We really appreciate it. Yes, a round of applause for JD. You are welcome anytime. If you ever feel the need to expand on your topics or you have something new to talk about, please come back. Irina, you're on my radar and you're not going to escape. Any of you that have anything you'd like to come to the lounge and talk about, you know how to reach either Jocko or I or Tiani, who didn't make it today. Please, feel free to bring us topics and things like that to discuss. And once again, JD, thank you so much for your time and your presentation. And thanks to all of you for hanging in. Bye.
See ya. Thanks.
Thanks.